Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Looks like we are going to be apart for a little longer. I think April 27th is when they are trying to get us back into school. We'll see. So looks like we might have to do this a bit longer than we knew, but thanks to everybody who completed the paragraph. I had asked you to write after watching the Sacagawea video. Only 10 people completed that though, 10 people out of 70. So it will eventually go into Power School. It won't be counted as a grade, but at least your parents can see, okay, you did it or you didn't. So hopefully they are trying to help you through this, because it's difficult for us teachers to do that since you are at home with them. Maybe if you don't want to do it, which you should, maybe your parents will feel like, hey, this is the only kind of education really that you're getting, unless of course you're doing some other stuff on your own, which would be great. And I do encourage you to do that. If you do have an interest in Sacagawea, find some other resources online, Lewis and Clark Expedition. Who knows? You may hear some banging upstairs. That is my family up there. It seems like sometimes they come right through the ceiling, and sometimes I worry. But as of yet, I haven't seen any plaster falling or anything, so that's a good sign. But yeah, they're upstairs, and that's the banging. The microphone cancels out a lot of it, but I'm sure you're probably hearing that. I don't know what's going on, but so if you haven't completed that paragraph, please do. Please stick around and watch the second half of the Sacagawea article. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to read about it, or I'll read it to you. And then I have some vocabulary words that might help you out. And this is also going to other people who are stuck at home, some of my friends on Facebook, and it'll go to their kids. So I probably won't talk directly to you. It'll be more of a generic lesson for other people. But going back to those paragraphs, some people did mention how it sounded like she was a slave. Now, it was never mentioned in the video, but people were using specific evidence from the video to make that connection, and it is hard to argue. She was forced into marrying, seemed forced, marrying into one of her captors who bought her. She had a child. Who knows if it was forced, as I think Ethan mentioned that. So yeah, it sounds like overall she didn't have a great life. Some people pointed to some nicer aspects of her life. Could be possible. There was one thing that was mentioned, that she chose to move on with the expedition even after she met her brother. You know, who knows? Maybe she was forced to go along. People mentioned that she did have to trade that beloved belt of hers, which is unfortunate. So for the 10 of you who did it, I mean, nice job, awesome job, really good work. And if you've only read over 2 of them, I would encourage you to read some of the others, because people brought up really good points about what was in that video. So hopefully you've watched the other video that talks about like the Lewis and Clark expedition, but then also the French Revolution and the American Revolution. So all that stuff is good and leads up to what we're going to be talking about today in the article, which is the actual expedition where Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea, and we'll find out her little baby, will go on throughout the American West. So starting in approximately St. Louis, going out into Oregon. So if you tuned in, thank you for watching, and I hope you learn a little something from the video. Hello, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to talk about part 2 of Sacagawea's life. If you haven't yet seen part 1, I'll put up a little link. You can click on that video, and that will take you to part 1 of Sacagawea's life. So we're going to pick up right with the second part of the article, right where I left off on, you might be hearing some bouncing around with my family up there. But with the second part, right where I left off in the article. But before we get to that, I would like to cover a couple potentially difficult vocabulary words. And the first one we're going to come to is edible. Edible, simply meaning able to be eaten. Able to be eaten. So of course you can imagine Sacagawea, she doesn't have any supermarkets nearby. She's gonna have to forage or look for or find vegetables. People will be hunting, but it will be helpful if she knows which berries she can eat, which berries are edible and which are inedible. So if you have that word edible, but then you put an IN on the front of it, make it inedible, that's the opposite. It means you're not able to eat it. You might die. But I think you could also call like a car inedible, like you really can't eat it. But also mushrooms, certain mushrooms are poisonous, and you could also call those inedible. The next potentially difficult vocabulary word, maybe you haven't seen this word, could give you trouble, is capsized. Capsized. Normally, this is talked about with boats, and it is a fancy way to say sink. The boat capsized. The boat sunk. Cargo might also be difficult. Again, this is mostly with boats. I suppose you could say it with trucks and vehicles, but there are actually things called cargo ships. And cargo is product. It's useful things, usually carried from one place to the other, usually transported from one place to the other. So during this coronavirus quarantine, where most of us are inside our houses, hopefully, and trying to stay safe and keep other people safe, it is important though that cargo keeps moving. So people need food. Hospitals are going to need masks and ventilators. It's important that that cargo keeps moving across the country, maybe the world, to places where it is needed most. Cargo. The next one can be a little tricky, and that is suspicious. Suspicious. This is when you are a little unsure of the situation. In fact, you think something might go wrong. You could be suspicious. Suspicious is going to be used when the Lewis and Clark expedition is going to be encountering or meeting tribes in the area they are exploring. So many of those tribes could look at these white men as being suspicious. Like, why are they here? They look at them with suspicion. Suspicion. That's the noun form, suspicion. So to use suspicion as a noun, you could say they looked at them with suspicion. Suspicion is a noun. But if you want to use it as an adjective, which describes a noun, you could say the men were suspicious as Lewis and Clark approached. So now suspicious is describing the men, which is a noun. Men is a noun. So we have nouns, people, places, and things. We have adjectives, which describe people, places, and things. And now we have adverbs, which describe adjectives. And adverbs can also describe verbs. So they can be used a number of different ways. And if you take suspicious or suspicion and make it an adverb, you would say suspiciously. So the men looked at Lewis and Clark suspiciously. Now you have an adverb. It depends on what it is describing. And that sentence I just said, and I'll put it right above my head, suspiciously is describing the way the men looked. Looked is a verb. So I will do that every so often in these videos, talk a little grammar, parts of speech. Definitely isn't my favorite thing to talk about, but when you encounter a word that might be a noun, it's helpful if you can also recognize it as an adverb or an adjective because sometimes the form really changes, like suspicious, suspicion, suspiciously. All the basic like same word, just depending on how you use it, you might have to change it. And speaking of words being changed depending on how you use them, the last word in this article I would like to discuss before we read it is miraculous. Miraculous. And it actually comes from the noun miracle. They're both really related. So if something is a miracle, it's a noun. But if it is being described, like an event is happening, the noun, and it's being described as something like a miracle, we would say miraculous. Makes it very difficult. Both pretty much the same word, but because of the way it is used, the ending is really changed. And the great thing about this video, if it was unclear, then, and hopefully I explained it the right way, I think I did. If it was unclear the first time, you can always rewatch it. Take a look at it again. Take a look at it 2-3 times. You got plenty of time on your hands, right? It's not like you have to go anywhere. If you are unclear about adjectives, adverbs, and nouns, watch the video again. It's a tricky subject. Don't feel bad if you don't get it the first time. I'll make more with more examples, and hopefully by the end of this long quarantine, you'll be like, all right, I know how to use nouns, adjectives, adverbs. It will really help with your writing too. So I am going to start reading in the middle section, which is called Lewis and Clark Expedition. Anytime you see an article, hopefully you're looking at those subheadings. So you have the title, which is, I can't remember what it's called, but something about Sacagawea. I mean, I got it right here. I guess I could look at it. It's Cultural Pioneer Sacagawea. That's the title of the article. But if you look at some of these subheadings, the first one is called Early Life. The next one here is called Lewis and Clark Expedition. The one after that is Her Life After the Expedition. So we already read the synopsis. You get a pretty good idea of what the article is about. Pay attention to those subheadings too, because they're like the main idea. It's what holds that section together. So don't skip reading those. They're actually in like dark black so that you'll see them really well. So read that and then you get another idea of, okay, this part is going to be about the expedition. The next part is going to be about her life after the expedition. Lewis and Clark Expedition. In February 1805, Sacagawea gave birth to a son named Jean-Baptiste Cabinot. And if you are watching this and you speak French, I probably messed that up. I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do. Jean-Baptiste Cabinot. Despite traveling with a newborn baby, Sacagawea proved to be helpful in many ways. She was skilled at finding edible plants. When a boat on which she was riding capsized, she was able to save some of its cargo, including important documents and supplies. She also served as a symbol of peace. A group traveling with a woman and a child was treated with less suspicion than a group of men alone. Sacagawea also made a miraculous discovery of her own during the trip west. When the explorers encountered a group of Shoshone Indians, she soon realized that its leader was actually her brother, Kameawait. It was through her that the expedition was able to buy horses from the Shoshone to cross the Rocky Mountains. Despite this joyous family reunion, Sacagawea remained with the explorers for the trip west. So this is one of those difficult things about history, is that we don't know exactly what she was thinking. We know what she did. She met her brother and then continued on with the expedition. But we don't know if that was what she wanted to do or if she was forced to do it. Some of my students wrote about parts of Sacagawea's life. Some said that it seemed as if she was a slave, the way that she was captured and kind of forced, if not actually forced, to marry this random man, as one of my students said. But who knows exactly what she was thinking? We're going to read later on and find out that she actually did have a lot of respect from the group because of a situation that happened, we can know with some certainty that they did really respect Sacagawea as a person, and we'll get to that in a minute. After reaching the Pacific Ocean in November 1805, Sacagawea was allowed to vote along with the other members of the expedition on where they would build a fort to stay for the winter. They built Fort Clatsop near present-day Astoria, Oregon, and remained there until March of the following year. Sacagawea, her husband, and her son remained with the group on the return trip east until they reached the Mandan villages. During the journey, Clark had become fond of her son, Jean-Baptiste, nicknaming him Pomp or Pompey. Clark even offered to help him get an education. So the fact that she was allowed to vote in 1805 with the group does show us that they did have a lot of trust in her, that the group really respected her opinion. Think back to 1805. Women weren't even allowed to vote in elections. 1805. It wouldn't be until 1920 when women were allowed to vote nationwide. So she must have really impressed the people in the expedition. We also found out that Clark of Lewis and Clark, one of the two main people leading this expedition, really became fond of her child. And we'll see that exactly how fond they become in this third part. Her life after the expedition. Once Sacagawea left the expedition, few details of her life are known. In 1809, it is believed that she and her husband, or just her husband, according to some accounts, traveled with their son to St. Louis, Missouri, to see Clark. Pomp was left in Clark's care. Sacagawea gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Lisette, 3 years later. Only a few months after her daughter's arrival, Sacagawea died at Fort Manuel in what is now Kennel, South Dakota, around 1820. After Sacagawea's death, Clark looked after her two children and ultimately took custody of them both. So as the article says, there is a lot that is unknown about her life, her husband's life after the expedition. We do know that her two children would eventually live with Clark. He would raise them. Some people say that maybe she didn't die in 1812. There is a little bit of evidence showing that she lived past 1812, but most of the evidence points to her dying. One huge fact is that she gave up her children. A lot of people argue if she was alive, she would still have her children. And the husband, we're not sure. Maybe he was sick. The article doesn't say it, but it is said that Sacagawea died of really high fever, which was not uncommon in 1812. Of course, medicine wasn't as great as we have it today, or at least until we had the coronavirus. So it just shows you how much our medicine is lacking for some things. But fever did kill many people before the invention of some very important medicines used today. Last little paragraph here. Over the years, tributes to Sacagawea and her contribution to the Corps of Discovery have come in many forms. There are places named after her and statues made in her image. She was even featured on a dollar coin issued in 2000 by the U.S. Mint. In that last little bit there, U.S. Mint, if you're not familiar with the verb mint, it can actually be a verb. I know it can be something that you eat that kind of freshens your breath, a mint, that's the noun. But if you use it as a verb, to mint something actually means to make money. So the U.S. Mint makes money. So that's gonna just about do it for today. I hope you learned a little something. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. I hope that if you have any questions, you'll leave a comment in the comment section. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.